Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Daily Objective. It's a new week and we got a new topic to talk about today. Now, this time we're not looking outwards into the world. We're actually going to look inward. We're going to, I guess, navel gaze a bit, if you like, and talk about a project by one of our very own hosts, a guy who goes by the name of Lucifer, Mark Pellegrino.
I prefer Lucifer, but thank you.
All right. Well, that name might actually become your name if we don't roll this out right. If we don't get down to if we don't ask the tough questions and get some answers. We want to, if we've learned one thing in this world is that PR is more important than ever in the age of the volatile masses on the internet. So we're here to talk about your project, The Guardian.
Well, let me just say, I'm so happy they didn't have PR when they were rolling out light bulbs and other great inventions, because you got to sort things out sometimes in the act of doing it. You can't figure out all the possibilities from the get-go.
True, and even without such a PR industry, they probably got some bad PR, like, oh, this guy's putting the kerosene people out of business, or the guy who invented fire, famously is said to have been burnt at the stake. He showed his brothers how to light. So we want to make sure. Well, we want to make sure I understand this project, and if I understand it, there's a good chance other people will get it as well. So how about I ask you this? What is the Guardian Project?
That's a good place to start, I guess. Well, the Guardian Project is a multi-tiered means of dealing with the phenomenon of online libeling. And in the wider sense, online bullying, but more specifically on online libeling. And the Kickstarter project that we started was for the purpose of fulfilling one of those tiers, which is a docuseries that in essence empowers victims of these types of horrible episodes. In one sense, we would have the resources to investigate the victimizer and support the victim if their lives have been ruined by the creation of false narratives. And I don't know if this is a word, the viralization of those false narratives. Then we would provide the resources to make that person whole again, to reestablish their reputation in the community, to possibly seek some form of justice or against the victimizer, and if they've lost their job, to support them in some way to reestablish another career path. And for the wider phenomenon of bullying, we hope to bring victim and victimizer together in the sense that we think that anonymity incentivizes this kind of relational aggression, where the victimizer doesn't really relate to the victim. They're not really a living person, even if they're a check mark and someone they know. They're an abstraction to them, and they can be as violent as they want to them because they experience no real consequences. So we would take away that anonymity and bring them together, and they would face one another, hopefully with the idea in our mind of a form of reconciliation and a sort of rehabilitation of the victimizer, where they would agree to opening up their social media to us and participating for a year in internet hygiene, and actually producing beneficent things online and helping people as opposed to destroying people. So that's sort of the thumbnail sketch of what the Guardian Project, the docuseries, would be.
So this is a docu-series
like Catfish, right?
Oh, it's a show then. It's not it's not like an organization that like lobbies with tech companies and asks them to change their policy.
That's other aspects of the Guardian Project, but what we were funding was this show, sort of along the lines of Catfish, inspired for the same reasons, because the guy who created Catfish had a relationship with somebody online who was basically not who she said she was, and so he decided to protect other people who were victims of the same type of internet fraud.
Interesting. Well, from I think a PR standpoint, having it as a docu-series can definitely put a human face on yourself and the project so that people are not, making all types of assumptions. So I like that part of it for sure. Now, I like when you said the word libel. You're here to address the issue of libel. I think a lot of people, they hear that word, they go, yeah, the media keeps lying about people, about me or people that I respect. The media keeps lying. So they might like that part of it. When you say we're here to address online bullying. Now it sounds like, all right, look, the internet is a place where people get to have their fun and talk their smack. And now the grown-ups are here and they're trying to take that away from us. And from my cold, dead hands, will you take away online bullying? I think is how people might respond. So what makes you use the word bullying when you're talking about something that is, in essence, sounds like libel, like lying about people? Is it the fact that it's kind of distributed, like getting a lot of people to libel this person together, that aspect of it makes it like a bullying type of thing?
I think we have two different takes on justice because I see libel as a more objective criteria for judgment and bullying as less objective, and that's why with respect to bullying, the idea would be towards rehabilitation and confrontation in the benevolent sense of healing two parties. Because in my view, this type of trolling that we would call bullying is just as harmful to the psychology and the spirit and the values of the person doing the bullying as it is to the person who's receiving it. So that's why I compartmentalize the type of justice that we would seek in each case, because one would be based on more or less objective standards, where somebody's livelihood is threatened by a false narrative, by the promotion of a false narrative. Deliberately destroying somebody's livelihood by a false narrative is much easier to prove than hurting somebody's feelings. But even then, with respect to bullying, I think those are categorized into different subsets as well. There's the guy who just uses harsh language on somebody, and then there's the person who deliberately trolls and harasses a person, and with such negativity and or brings others into their orbit to contribute to the harassment, that's a different kind of act, and that needs to be treated differently as well.
Okay.
So you can still have, you can still be rough with people online. You can still curse with them and have your slap fights. But are you tagging internet influencers, social media influencers? Are you dragging in media to a fight that didn't exist before? Are you trying to paint a false narrative and then trying to bring other people into the fight? To me, that's a troll who's doing more than just insulting you. They're trying to hurt you.
So in this docu-series that you're hoping to do, are you reaching out to both parties first and seeing if they want to participate, or are you like finding out who the victimizer is and surprising them like outside their house? Like how do you envision this work?
I think that's something that once we get into the nuts and bolts of it with the producer who knows how to work out the mechanics of the show, we have to sit down with a legal team and sort out exactly what we can and can't do. And I'm sure what we can and can't do will depend on the state that we're doing it in, on internet harassment laws and other laws that have to be respected if we're to respect rights and privacy at the same time that we're trying to expose bad actors.
I absolutely see the importance of having lawyers take a look at this, but from a kind of a more PR standpoint of trying to have this be a benevolent and positive project that won't make you end up looking like doxers. Do you have a way you're looking at, like, doxing, for those who don't know, is when you like expose somebody's address or
none of that would happen. None of that. You wouldn't be exposing somebody's address. You wouldn't even necessarily be saying their name online, and maybe you'd pixelate out their face, depending on the nature of the agreement between you and the other person, of course. But certainly the idea is for people to meet personally, to connect to the victim and the victimizer in a way that each are human to each other now, And from there, we can, I think, start a civil discourse and maybe even reform some behavior.
Mm-hmm. Now, Mary Ellen in the super chat, thank you all the super chatters. Mary Ellen asks, have you done anything relating to the Me Too movement, which is a legitimate side, but has also victimized a lot of men, she says. And from talking to you previously, I get the impression a lot of the inspiration for this came from allegations of sexual misconduct towards some people. Is that, or anyway, can you answer that?
That's correct. An actor friend of mine who was on a long running show that I did, was accused of sexual harassment, and I was silly enough to stand up for due process. So when I saw his life being destroyed before my eyes, and when I saw people jumping onto the sexual harassment accusation boat by the tens, and even 100 eventually signed up and said they were sexually harassed by him in cities that he'd never been in ever. There's no record of him ever being there. I told the mob that their problem was a legal one, and that it couldn't be tried in the court of public opinion because they were destroying a person's life. They were depriving him of due process. They weren't allowing him to confront his accusers, to present evidence. In fact, when he got cease and desist orders against them, they would frame them, put them on their walls, and take selfies with them, flaunting the law. They literally didn't care what they did to this guy. Now, about 2 years after they completely destroyed his life, the original accuser came out on social media and said she lied about the whole thing because she felt like she was part of a group. It made her feel important. She apologized profusely. Of course, the damage was done. And many of the people who maintained the narrative stuck to the narrative because, of course, their reputations are now on the line. And but that's what originally got me into this, because my defense of due process turned their attention on me, and suddenly every aspect of my life, my political life, my philosophical life, my ethical life, was subject to microscopic analysis. You know, under the in the social justice warrior linguistics, everything was picked apart for signs of racism and bigotry, and then those narratives were propagated and then viralized out there in the universe as if they were real. So I was a victim of defending somebody who was falsely accused. But I'm also a defender of a woman at the moment who is in the midst of a sexual harassment lawsuit with a former anchor on Fox News, and I am an avid defender of her, and a defender of anybody who is powerless and uses social media to get the power they wouldn't ordinarily have to amplify their voice. So certainly we have to make the distinction between false narratives and that which is real.
Yeah, I mean, the part where the accuser ends up apologizing and saying, you know, I felt like I was part of something, that kind of reminds me of the fact that the sort of campaigns to battle bullying often ends up sort of, in a sense, sort of glorifying being a victim. Obviously, that's like an abuse of what was meant to be. But people, especially young people, they can feel like, oh yeah, I was bullied too. Oh yeah, I was also, I was also a victim. So it's just so difficult to deal with a lot of these issues. And with the internet just injects everything with steroids and magnifies the problems, in addition to kind of giving a lot of tools for success. So you're
right. We also have a victimhood narrative out there that prioritizes victimhood and sort of canonizes it. So the more I want to say intersectionalities of oppression and victimhood you can actually embrace as part of your identity, this more social cachet you get nowadays. So we definitely have to be careful about I think magnifying the zeitgeist that is going on now. And I mean, I want to kill that. I want that to end. But we certainly have to try to find line in a culture that looks at victimhood as a badge of merit.
Yeah, look, if there's anyone who I trust to kind of take on a project like this and use it positively, I think you're one of the people I would trust. My questions today are more about how can this be rolled out in a way where you don't become sort of the face of kind of cashing in on accusations, or of trying to police people's speech, because of course this can be interpreted as, oh, so if I don't like someone online, or or if I think they're guilty of something and I say something, I could end up having a camera crew show up, or just in some way I can be reprimanded for that. Is one of your agendas to have sort of communicate with companies like Twitter and ask them to require ID or something like that when people sign up? So that's going to be a tough one. That's going to be a tough sell for a lot of people. I'm gonna be honest with you.
All right.
That's a big one. Now with Facebook, it's sort of halfway there already, because Facebook will, I think, delete your account if they don't think you're a real person. So largely people have something like their real name and a picture of them on Facebook. Twitter, Instagram, YouTube commenters. I mean, there's a lot of platforms where anyone could just sign up for as many accounts as they want, and let the good times roll, or the bad times. And you're hoping, it sounds like, to sort of make it more of a process of accountability, where you need to kind of prove that you're a real resident of this planet with a name, and it's going to be kept private the way you're hoping to roll it out. But you are trying to get people to be required to show ID when they sign up for social media companies. Is that correct?
That's correct. I also think social media companies need to find objective means of establishing what speech is and what constitutes a violation of speech. And I think the rules should be fairly clear and simple, not algorithms informed by social justice linguistics that unduly land on one side of the political aisle. I think the social media companies are losing credibility as a result of these sort of subjective standards. But there's a clear standard of what isn't allowed. What isn't allowed? Force and fraud, libel, slander. That's an indirect form of force. And nowadays, with social media becoming the new news platform, people in effect become individual platforms, news platforms, and they become journalists. If you're passing a false narrative about somebody that becomes viral and gets thousands upon thousands and thousands of views, and then that has reverberations down the line, you're passing on news like the Inquirer is, or like the New York Times, but you're doing it with gossip. So I think that social media companies need to make their standards objective. Number one, I think IDs that would take the problem of bots, Chinese bots, Russian bots, all kinds of bots that are bad actors out there, out of the equation, right? And if these IDs are shared across media platforms, so that real violations of objective rules of civil discourse and speech become the standard for all, and these IDs are shared across platforms. If you get banned from Twitter for being libelous, well, that's going to affect Facebook and Snapchat and all the other social media platforms, I think, rightfully. So that a real ban is a real ban. You're done. You've used your social microphone to sow chaos and violence and to destroy people. You don't deserve to have the microphone.
Now, given the fact that most of these companies are not enforcing the rules fairly, and there is many double standards in place, isn't it going to do kind of more harm than good if the social media platforms start working together by the same standard, and a ban from Twitter means a ban from everything? Won't you see people's careers and livelihoods wiped out because of one decision by someone at one of those companies? And it might very, very much be kind of the wrong decision and unfair.
And indeed, if somebody is operating according to subjective standards, which they do now, they deplatform people all the time who don't deserve to be deplatformed. They literally rip they demonetize them and take their living out from under them. That's happening now. I think there would be less of that because the standards would be objective. You would have to prove objective harm, falsehood, libel, slanders. That's different than just aggressive speech. That's not the same thing. So I think the people who would be deplatformed would be people who are committing civil harm. And I don't mean by saying something that makes a lot of people uncomfortable. I mean, they're truly damaging reputations. So I think objective standards would have less of that problem going on, right? I mean, we've seen Dave Rubin, Yaron Brook be deplatformed, Sargon of what's his name, Sargon of Akkad, or whatever the guy. Yeah, whatever
He
his
was
name is.
removed from Patreon. I don't think Iran was, but
Removed, but there were threats, I think, with Iran. I think there were issues where he was on iffy ground with them. And, with respect to Iran, especially, or Dave, who's just an open-minded liberal who actually talks to anybody who wants to talk with him, that shows deep prejudice in the way that they're evaluating content. And I think making it objective will start to, I think the people at large, especially people on the other side of the aisle, will begin to invest more trust in these social media systems, which are losing trust. They're losing everybody's trust.
I mean, when you say there's objectively they've done harm, do you mean in court? Do you mean by the committee?
I'll give you an example from my own life. Look, I mean,
okay. I'm thinking about how it's going to be enforced, not so much whether the harm existed or not. Like who decides? Is it, when you say objectively, is it going to be a judge somewhere? Or is it the committee, the team at Twitter? Is my question.
I think the team itself, there should be a team that has objective standards, and I don't know yet what that team would be composed of. We'd have to get together with these social media companies and see if they're even open to making objective standards, and see if they're even know what that means. And then we have to sort out how one judges these standards, and what kinds of offenses make for a strike or a suspension, and does that flag you in other social media platforms? That's a huge discussion that private companies can have with people like me, and work out the logistics of it, which I think whatever we come up with is far better than the idea of Congress interfering with speech and suspending Article 230 and/or taking away the immunities that these companies have and regulating their speech all over the place in the name of fairness. That to me is a far more scary problem than us, coming up with standards privately, sometimes running into kinks and problems, but working them out as we go along.
Yeah, but I know I interrupted your personal story you started to tell. Did you want to mention that, if you remember what it is, or should I move on?
I mean, sure. People have spread narratives about me that are outright false, and they've been proven false, not only by me but by hundreds and hundreds of other people. But those narratives inspired a change.org petition to get me fired from all of my jobs. And that change.org petition got 1,400 signatories to it. Now, I don't know if those were, just a handful of people under different identities, padding the numbers, but 1,400 people is not insignificant. And the only reason the change.org petition got thrown out is because their language was so vile and they were so obviously malignant that change.org said, you're out of here, you're done. And I had counter change.org petition that raised 20,000 signatures to keep me. But still, that's an attempt at objectively damaging me. And every time they link one of my employers, a promoter for a convention that I do, to the false narrative, they are trying to hurt me objectively. Or anytime they email or even email an employer and say, I don't feel safe with him around, they're attempting to destroy my reputation and take away a source of income, which I witnessed. They did to someone else. They actually did it to somebody else.
I mean, no question that there's a problem. I know that trying to address it is going to require some PR strategy, some way to phrase it right. I think the more you emphasize abuses by the Me Too movement, I think you'll win over people that would otherwise be hostile to what you're doing. And the more you emphasize the social justice philosophy has taken over big tech, the more a lot of those people who would normally be hostile might give you a chance. So yeah, tap into that, because it's relevant, and it could save you from unnecessarily getting, ironically enough, mass smeared and made to look like you're here to end and break the internet. And you mentioned, we don't want Congress to take over this. Are you concerned that if companies are starting to require ID and stuff like that, and at a time when the Tucker Carlsons of the world want, big tech to be regulated, which of course we know marries the government to big business and ultimately would be basically giving the government this sort of big brother style technology to track everything we do? I mean, isn't that kind of potentially making the situation worse, where now, like, we're giving our ID, we're giving in our information to companies voluntarily who are then going to end up basically being blended with the government?
Well, I think that's the reason I'm doing it in the way that I'm doing it, is to keep the government out of it. And I think that's an incentive for social media to say, oh, look, here's a guy trying to come in and help us make adjustments in the private sector. We don't need Senator Lindsey Graham or Ted Cruz telling us what to do and what to think. And certainly if private information is being shared on these platforms, as they are across all kinds of platforms, we don't want the government to be privy to any of that information, to our tastes, to the products that we buy, to the books that we read. So that's why I think this is a better solution, because we're solving it sans Ted Cruz. We don't need him. So yeah, I don't feel strange. Other people might feel strange about their personal information going out online, but almost all of us have our personal information out online because we buy things through Amazon, and we buy things virtually now. And you simply have to be, a legitimate human being registered with these companies in order to do any business with them online. So it would be no different than that. It would just prevent you from signing up, to multiple accounts simultaneously. You'd have your own account, and that's it.
Yeah, I hate to say it, but I think what you're describing is inevitable, where just like with Amazon, you got your info registered with them. It'll probably be the same with YouTube, with Twitter, with everything. The question is, if you're trying to get there, how to communicate the reasons why you're trying to do that, and to win people over, if this is in fact the right decision to do. This is a tough topic, I guess. One more question. So we know another company could spring up tomorrow out of Silicon Valley that's a competitor to Twitter, for instance. Are you hoping that requiring people's info is just kind of the norm that companies do, or do you think there's a legal ground to tell companies you should require people's ID because they are basically like journalists? I mean, have you thought about whether this should be a requirement by law that companies need to require that, or is it just something
I'm not,
hoping?
I'm not, as a civil libertarian-esque. I know libertarian is a bad word to us, but it's the only word in the discourse people understand. I am very hesitant for the law to tell you what to do. I think we can influence the market by influencing preferences, and people want accountability. They do. There's too many victims out there, and accountability is a marketable commodity. I think that's why Parler is starting to grow. It's just not very user-friendly. It would probably grow much more if it were as user-friendly as Twitter. But they made me ID myself. And people know who I had to submit a valid form of ID to be registered with Parler. So I think it's just about changing the normative behavior. We by education and by appealing to people's better sense, we don't have to get a whole bureaucracy saying this is now the standard. The standard will establish itself in the market.
Yeah, it sounds like you were required ID to get probably a verification on Parler, but other than that, if you just wanted to sign up and talk some smack on Parler, I imagine
right.
You would
but if I can do it, I'm not so afraid of it. Somebody else can as well, and I do it so that people can't imitate me or pretend they're me, and throw out more false narratives out there that they are attributing to me. But hey, if we do that with everybody, then nobody can do that.
Right. I mean, look, I hope I've done my due diligence here in challenging this project in a way that'll satisfy some of the potential critics, present and future, because I know people might be quick to interpret this as an attempt to sort of end the internet as we know it. And this is a fascinating topic. Maybe we can have a part 2 sometime once kind of more is developed and understood about this project?
Can I just say, look, I think the congressional hearings are an attempt to end the internet as we know it. It's a first step to throwing that wedge into free speech, which has already been thrown in anyway. So it's just a show trial. But that's the real movement that's attempting to destroy free speech in the interests in the under the banner of fairness. Private solutions like mine that are attempting to deal with real problems of the internet. They don't cause the same kinds of problems that Congress does when they interfere in this world.
On that, we agree absolutely. But part of PR means taking into account the misguided perspective that people out there have. So unfortunately, we live in a world where people on the right, they applaud seeing Ted Cruz grill Mark Zuckerberg. They think that's a good thing. But someone like you, who's very well-meaning, but they might have a disagreement with, they might paint as just the ultimate villain of our time vis-a-vis the internet. So we do need to take that into account. I mean, this obviously needs to be, and anytime you need somebody to push back a bit and kind of tell you how this can be interpreted, I'm the guy to talk to. And speaking of talking and speaking of the internet and computers, in about 28 minutes from now, we've got Dr. Lee Pearson on here on the Ayn Rand Center UK channel talking about artificial intelligence and human consciousness, what computers can't know. This is a fascinating topic. There's a lot of excitement about it. Lex Friedman has a show where he talks about artificial intelligence. We're going to blow him out of the water. We're about to change the internet as we know it, because we're about to be the new channel where people turn to for discussion of these fascinating topics. Again, that's at the bottom of this hour. Please, set the reminder or whatever you got to do. We'll see you soon. Thank you, Mark. Good luck.
Thanks,
I'm looking forward to learning more about this. And thank you all for joining at home. Thank you all the super chatters. Thank you, fans and critics alike. This is going to be a fascinating journey looking ahead. And until tomorrow, this has been the Daily Objective. Goodbye.